Sean Payton, head coach of the New Orleans Saints. What's with this Saints Happy podcast? This has to be the worst Saints podcast in the world. Ralph can't say anyone's name right. Andrew doesn't know football. Everyone has a hard time listening to Dave. And is Kevin even there tonight? The audio with this podcast, my God, the audio, it's painful.
All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Saints Happy Hour podcast. This one is a bucket list item for me. I am not going to lie, Andrew. I am so excited about this interview. I think this is the most excited I've ever been about an interview. And listen, guys, you know, we had Mina Kimes, we had Bomani Jones, we've had Zach Streif, we have all kinds of people on this podcast. But Andrew, we got Randy Mueller, ex-Dolphins GM, Chargers executive, but he was the Saints general manager from 2000 to 2002. And me and you, 2000 Saints is like one of our favorite things ever. We love to talk about it, and he loves to talk about it too. Randy, thanks for giving us time today.
Hey, my pleasure. It's great to be with you guys. Just hearing the intro and you guys talk about the Saints makes me smile, so I'm happy to be here.
Randy, you were Saints GM from 2000 to 2002. It's a long time ago now, but I do think your philosophy about being aggressive in free agency is still very much like it's a part of the Saints, like their sort of philosophy and ethos. In 2000, you guys signed, I was doing the research on this and I've forgotten, you signed 11 free agents according to an ESPN article that I found, in 14 days, and you attempted to trade into the first round to get Darren Howard, even though you didn't have a first round pick. He ended up falling to you. So that is like aggression on steroids. And the Saints with Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton, they still sort of do it. So do you view Mickey Loomis's and the Saints GM philosophy as it's sort of still very much what you kind of brought in 2000?
Well, it's what I believe in, that's for sure. And it's no secret that Mickey and I were together for 20 years. So a lot of our beliefs, a lot of our philosophies were kind of melded together during our long run together. We were together in Seattle for 17 and another almost 3 in New Orleans. So, I don't know. I've always just felt like you need to be in on every deal. You can always say no at the end of the deal. And I remember hearing that from Paul Allen and his group back before I even went to New Orleans. Paul used to say, get us in the middle of every deal. We can always say no at the end of it. So I took that to heart. And obviously that first few months on the job in New Orleans, we had a complete rebuild to make, and things happened good for us. The good thing was the franchise was positioned with good salary cap space. So we could do that. And part of those 11 guys that you mentioned, some of them were Seattle guys that I brought with me. Others were guys that our new staff was familiar with. So there was a sense of consensus from all of us when we made those decisions. And I'd like to think that's still the case in New Orleans. You're right. They've always been aggressive. They've always been on the edge of the cap. They've always been on the edge of adding players. But I think you got to do that. I'd never want to suppress expectations. And I think expectations are good. And the Saints always have expectations every year of being in the hunt. I think that's a good thing.
Well, I think all of us have played GM on Madden, and try to sign as many players as we possibly can and kind of be armchair GM. So I think all of our listeners have done that at some point. But, not only takes signing a lot of guys, it takes hitting on those players. And,
right.
What I remember about that 2000 offseason was you look at guys like Jeff Blake, you look at guys like Norman Hand, Joe Horn. You hit on a lot of these guys where not only did you sign a lot of guys, but they were extremely productive. And that's what was maybe so effective in helping you change the culture and change the success of the team so quickly. How did you have so much success that offseason with all those guys?
Well, I think we were able to identify some ascending players and then take advantage of our experiences elsewhere when we got there. You mentioned Jeff Blake as in particular. He had been in Cincinnati. He had been with the Jets beforehand. His agent was a good friend of mine, Ralph Sendrich. And we're kind of approaching free agency now in the NFL this year. And I hear all the tampering and this and that. Well, I can tell you guys now, 20 years later, we had Jeff Blake signed 2 days before free agency even opened. So that's one of those deals where we kind of fudged a little bit and came up with a pretty good plan. And we knew what he what his skill set was, and we knew what Mike McCarthy and our offense was going to run. So it was a good fit. A guy like Joe Horn was the 5th receiver in Kansas City. When we played them in Seattle, we played him twice a year for several years. I would always notice when Joe got in the game, our DBs would, guess what? They would back up just a step or two before each snap. Well, obviously they were worried about this guy running by him. And then we had kind of crafted a way to get Ron Zook out of their coaching staff, and Ron had been in Kansas City with him. So we had some background on these players and we were able to use it. In Norman Hand's case, what you mentioned there was that the franchise tag was on him. The Chargers had put the franchise tag on him. They couldn't work out a deal with him. So kind of in a huff, they took it off him. Jack Mills was his agent, and we signed him like 2 days later. So it happened quickly. You just got to be ready to react, and you never know when the price is going to fall in your lap where it's just too good to be true.
Ralph, you might have to clip that part about the admission there, because Roger Goodell may retroactively take a pick for that one.
Yeah. I'm still nervous, and I'm not even with the team right now, that I'm going to get a call from the league office saying, hey, you guys are over the cap, or we got to throw this contract out. I think it's just ingrained in me where I don't sleep good at night, worried about a call from the league.
I think, Ralph, you're muted there, buddy.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to play the elevator music during that part. So Randy, the interesting thing is as you talk about these deals, I'm fascinated with GMs, right? You do mock drafts, you run through every scenario that you could possibly have. As a general manager, when you start free agency, what is the sort of, not talking about like specific one maybe, but just in general, where a scenario happens where you're like, oh my God, this is chaos. What is the one scenario sort of over and over again that's the hardest to plan for and deal with as a GM once free agency starts?
Well, I don't know if I can put my finger on exactly one. I do know this, and you mentioned the word chaos, and I hear that a lot nowadays with what's going to happen with the cap being reduced and all that. It might be chaos for the media. It might be chaos in some cases for the agents. It's really not chaos for the teams, at least the ones that I've been around. We've had a plan. We knew exactly what we wanted to do, and we didn't need to converse with anybody or gather intel per se to execute our plan. So that's the biggest thing. I always like to have as much information as I can on the evaluations and the depth of the talent pool. So in this case, when free agency comes, I already know where the depth of the draft is. I already know what I think we can come up with on draft day. And I also know what we can't. So what I want to do is I want to maximize my options on draft day. And by doing that, if I know ahead of time where I'm thinking I can hit on some guys, I'm going to use free agency to supplement that. I'm going to give myself options in the draft, because let's face it, your franchises are built through the draft. And I believe that fully, but you can supplement in free agency. We didn't sign a bunch of big name players or big money players with the teams that I was at necessarily, but we filled needs so that we had options come draft day where we didn't have to pick a guy to fill a need. So I think that's the philosophy that a lot of teams, I don't see using it nowadays. That's always the one that has done me the best, is you've got to have all the information before you can even get into free agency and know what's available. So I used them hand in hand. I think that's a plan. We'll see how it works out for this year for a lot of teams, because the cap is definitely going to be more of an issue than it's ever been.
Well, speaking of the cap, and Randy, Ralph and I, we spend all our free time on Twitter. It's a problem. But Saints Twitter is a place where, a lot of discussion is about salary cap hell and what Mickey Loomis is up against. And a lot of national media and a lot of national fans, NFL fans, have opinions about how much trouble the Saints are in. And we as Saints fans know that's not necessarily the case. But Mickey Loomis you brought him over from Seattle, and, he really was known at first as a salary cap guy and kind of a financial guy and a numbers guy. And obviously he's evolved from that. But curious what your take is on the Saints situation as it stands now financially, and Mickey Loomis's ability to kind of navigate that stuff.
Well, I think he's the best for doing that. That's for sure. And you mentioned it. He was our salary cap, our finance guy in Seattle. And when he came with me to New Orleans as my right-hand man, that's really where his area of expertise lies. I think it's funny when you say, when you say Mickey and the aggressiveness that they've had. I thought for years, and I always used to come to his office and say, don't tell me no, just tell me it's done, because he always would give me reasons why we couldn't sign somebody because of the cap. We couldn't do this because of the cap. And now he's in my chair where all of a sudden he's got to go to his cap guys and say, hey, we're going to get this done. Just don't give me any excuses. Just get the guy signed. So what goes around comes around is what they say, right? So that's happened.
So you have shattered our worldview of Mickey Loomis, Randy, just now.
Well, that is what it is, and we're close, always have been, and just some of the things that make us all evolve into what we are today. That's for sure. I do think they are nickel and dime and trying to peck their way out of salary cap jail per se. They've got big plans, I'm sure, but again, the chaos that exists to the outside isn't necessarily the case on the inside. They've known this cap was going to go down since last summer. So that's not like they're scrambling to think of ideas how to save money on the cap. They've had 10 months to figure this out. So they've got a plan. They'll have it figured out. It'll be interesting to see what kind of team they have left at the end of all this when the dust settles, because they're going to have to put a productive team on the field again next year. And that may come with a step back from a talent-wise standpoint in 1 year anyway. So we'll see. I think I'm anxious to see. There's about a third of the league that is over the cap right now and really will be innocent bystanders in free agency, that's for sure. I'm not sure that's a bad thing, but they'll all figure it out. These guys have smart people. They have cap departments now that are manned by 2 and 3 guys in some places. So they have thought this through thoroughly, and I don't think it's quite as big of a case of chaos as gets portrayed sometimes on the outside.
Randy, one thing that I found really interesting about your career is your evaluations of quarterbacks. When you go back and look at it, it's pretty damn good in that you were with Seattle, you drafted Rick Meyer, then you traded him for a first to the Bears. You go to the Saints, you signed Jeff Blake, like you mentioned. You trade for Aaron.
Yeah.
What?
Rick Meyer for
you
Walter
trade for Aaron Brooks?
Yeah.
That was tremendous. Where you knew how to exit on a guy, but you signed Jeff Blake, you traded for Aaron Brooks, and then when you're in Miami, you chose Ted Ginn over Brady Quinn. You caught all sorts of hell for it, but looking back, it was right. So my question to you is, when you look at quarterbacks, what's the key thing that helps you decide whether that guy can be successful or not? Because your track record is pretty good.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we had some success finding quarterbacks from scrap heaps as well. And, we signed John Kitna to replace Rick Meyer in Seattle, and he became their all-time leading passer. And the other guys that were with us in New Orleans, we had Jeff Blake, we had Aaron Brooks, but we also had Jake Delhomme, who was there. And then we drafted Mark Bulger. People forget those were our four quarterbacks 1 year in training camp in Thibodeau, all became starters in the NFL. So that was a pretty good group. And you mentioned the infamous Ted Ginn pick. Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is having played the position, I've kind of been in their shoes a little bit, although it be at a lower level. I try to see the game as they would when I evaluate them. The biggest thing for me is we can figure out the physical skills. We can watch that, but it's how they process the information that they get, and then the decision-making, the delineation of what's expected of them to make decisions. Those are the kind of gray areas that I think get people in trouble. You've got to project the guy as to what he's doing in college into your system. I think that sets a lot of guys back in evaluating quarterbacks too. They get the physical skills part right, but they don't really project him to the fit that their offense is and how he's going to have to proceed. I think a great example of that is the quarterback carousel we're in right now. I think people are surprised when Jared Goff gets traded, first pick in the draft, gets traded out of the Rams. Well, there were some of us in San Diego that didn't even have Jared Goff in the first round. So that's not a surprise to the whole league. It's maybe a surprise to some. Carson Wentz is a guy that, and another one that just got traded, a ton of dead money left behind, historic salary cap ramifications. But I'm not sure that the last chapter's been written on Carson Wentz yet either. He may still become a really good quarterback in the NFL. So these things, kind of ebb and flow depending on the fit. And I think that's, to answer your question, the biggest thing is the fit, the offense, the type of decisions you're asking this guy to make. Those are the things that really determine a team's success or a quarterback's success. And then obviously the talent around him. You've got to do right by these quarterbacks. Some quarterbacks have no chance. You look at the kid from UCLA that came out a couple of years ago that went to Arizona and then Tampa and Miami. Who helped me with the name? Josh Rosen. He's now in San Francisco, I think, in a perfect system for him. And I think we may hear of this guy down the road as well. I wouldn't write him off as quickly as some have. So the fits are there. You just got to match them up. And I think if you can do that and forecast a little bit about what you're going to ask him to do offensively, you stand a chance to hit on these quarterbacks. It bristles me when people say it's a crapshoot. It's a crapshoot. The draft is a crapshoot. It's really not. It's a crapshoot for some. I think the people that say it's a crapshoot are the ones that can't figure it out. It's like going to the track, right? The horse track is a crapshoot if you're always losing, if you can't ever figure it out. But some people have a track record of figuring it out. So that's my 2 cents, and that and $2.50 would get you a Starbucks on any corner in Seattle. So whatever.
Randy, do you have an opinion about the Saints situation with Jameis Winston? They're trying to bring him back, and Taysom Hill. Have you evaluated those two quarterbacks, and do you have an opinion about how close they are to being successful starters in the league?
Well, I have looked at both of them on tape, as a matter of fact, this year, and I actually think they're on the right track. I might be crazy, but I think the two of them together can serve as a weapon and a success story. You match that up with Sean and his play calling and scheming and game planning. I think that they stand a chance to really not take a giant step back from where Drew's been the last year or two. There's not a Drew Brees in that group, but where they've been the last couple of years, I don't see any reason why Jameis can't do it. And you sprinkled in Taysom Hill as well with his skill set. I think they'll make a formidable team if they can figure out a way to do that.
You know, it's a good point that you make about the quarterbacks and teams that are successful, and they think that it's a crapshoot. How important is it? And I know these are sort of corporate words maybe, but like synergy. I feel like the Saints their drafting has improved. Jeff Ireland came, but they finally got stability on defense, and knowing that the staff was together for so long. Does that help in evaluation when everything is stable and you're not changing coaches and changing defenses and doing all that? How sort of underrated is that sort of thing where we as fans think we like change, we like new coordinators and all, but stability is one of those underrated things that helps you as an evaluator?
Oh, I think stability is giant, Ralph, and you hit on it. And I think from this standpoint, the stability is valuable when it's used in setting the criteria at a position for the kind of player you want. And so in this case, it's Sean's philosophy, it's Mickey's philosophy. That hasn't changed. And yes, maybe it's the fact that Jeff has been able to identify with a similar philosophy. I always said, you tell me what you want, I'll find it from a coach. Or you tell me what we're going to run on offense, and I'll find exactly the skill set that fits with what you're doing. You mentioned the XFL. I did that with June Jones last year in Houston. June and I had never worked together. We had been close together for years, but it took us no time at all to settle on exactly what he wanted at certain positions. And I was able to find that when we put that team together. So I think the stability is excellent. It's really good in a year like COVID that we just went through. But in your system, the stability of the characteristics of the players and the skill set you're looking for is big. Look at like the Steelers. Their defense has been the same for years, right? The criteria for their outside linebacker position has been the same for years. The same in some of the other positions that they look for. And guess what? They have changes at assistant coaches. Sometimes they have changes in the scouting department, but the system and the criteria stays the same. Those are the things that I think get not enough attention in the real world when they say teams don't draft good. Most of the time when teams don't draft good, they're either searching to fill a specific need, or they don't have a job description for what they're looking for. So they jump all around. Those are the two, in my opinion, fatal flaws of building a team.
All right, Randy, we got to go back to 2000. I know you like to live in the present. And but it's one of those things I love to reflect on. And as Ralph said, 2009 for us as Saints fans is probably at the top. But close second for me would be the 2000 season, finally being able to witness as a lifelong Saints fan a playoff win. And you mentioned a lot of these pickups that you had during that time. And I was in the stadium that day when Hakeem dropped the ball and Brian Milne falls on the football. And just the, you knew right then in that moment that it was acquired, that first playoff win. You were executive of the year following that season. And obviously it was a tremendously successful year for you personally, for the organization as a whole. And it was historic at the time for New Orleans. So can you reflect a little bit and just take us back to that and the feelings surrounding that playoff win and just kind of that year as a whole?
Yeah, I think it definitely was a special year. I think everybody builds teams on paper, but yet when the season starts, they have to come together and you have to manage your team. And in that year, all of it came together for us. Yes, we made a ton of changes. We rolled out a completely different version of the Saints, but I credit Jim Haslett, Mike McCarthy, Ron Zook, Rick Venturi, some of our coaches, that they're the ones that brought it together. And then we managed it as we go. We had a ton of injuries that year too. We lost guys along the way. It's not like we didn't have to overcome. Yeah. We overcame a ton of injuries.
That 2000 team, I remember Buddy D in the post-game show, the first preseason game, he called it the worst preseason game in the history of the Saints because y'all lost Rob Kelly, Cam Cleveland, and Steve Israel, I believe, all in the first two drives of that game as starters, and maybe one other person. So the injuries never stopped in 2000. It was incredible. But you had the depth. You had guys step up, and you got the picture of Willie Jackson behind you at last, who had the magic playoff game. How does that happen? How do you as a GM just keep finding guys that can do it? Maybe not for a whole year, but for a little stretch. Terry Allen was on that team. You got him up. He was 100 years old and ran for 80-something yards in San Francisco. How as a GM, how do you do that?
Well, I think you have to. It helped me because in Seattle, I was the pro guy for really 15 years. So I really had a handle on NFL rosters and NFL talent. So that helped us in the free agent market and helped us build some depth by identifying, again, players that I knew would fit with our offensive scheme. I think that cannot be undersold. The fact that we brought guys in that year, and it wasn't just me, it's we had a great staff. We had a really good scouting staff. There were some holdover guys that have gone on to be successful in the front office as well. But we had a good group of guys who were able to do that. And those guys and sometimes you're better off not knowing, right? We didn't know what we didn't know. So we were younger, we were aggressive, like you said, we added players, and these players just bought in. The city accepted them, and they accepted all of us, and it's fun to have that type of momentum. Hey, I've been 30 years in the NFL. I don't think I've ever experienced a season like that. It's funny, you talk about the playoff game and the fact that, Hakeem dropped the ball, one of the greatest memories really in Saints history. But what I remember about that game was just quickly, I'm an even keel guy. I'm not a cheerleader. I'm not a lower than, the bottom of the ocean guy. I'm an even keel guy, right? And we jumped ahead of the Rams. And I think it was Willie Jackson, you mentioned him, that actually caught a ball that put us up 30 something to 10 or something like that. It was a midway through the third quarter or maybe even the start of the fourth quarter. But this touchdown, and again, like I say, I never cheer. I remember clenching my fists under the desk in my box that I was watching the game at, and almost kind of smiling and pumping my fist saying, yeah, we got him. And it was from that moment on that the game went south for us, right? So for years, that's always been my memory of I'll never cheer for another touchdown in my career because that jinxed us. And if you remember, right, the Rams had a crazy comeback, and it took Hakeem dropping the ball for us to ice the game. But they came, Kurt Warner was throwing bombs down smokestacks for the whole fourth quarter, and we're holding on to our what just to try to get through it. But I always felt like it's because I cheered. I celebrated too early, So it's crazy what you think about and what you remember even 20 years later.
I remember that well.
I remember that game. I remember the secondary, everybody getting hurt in the in the playoff game. He lost Alex Molden. I think he lost another safety. And it was just like, oh my God, we're out of corners, and we're playing the greatest offense in the history of the world.
Well, remember, we had played them the week before in New Orleans again. So we played them back-to-back days. We played them the last game of the regular season, and they beat us in New Orleans. And they had to have the game to even get in as a wild card team.
That's right.
And so then they come back the next week, and it's, whoa, deja vu all over again. So we had a pretty good rivalry with them that season alone, in that we played them, 3 times, and there were no secrets, that's for sure. And it kind of ebbed and flowed. And fortunately, we held on and had a couple more points at the end.
Well, Randy, I want to ask you about this Ricky Williams trade too. Not the Ricky Williams trade, but the second one. And so you trade him, and at the time, so you have Deuce McAllister on your roster, so you're feeling better about that, and feeling good about running back. And so he gets traded for a first and a conditional third. And I just remember holding on to, he plays a week 17 overtime game. And I know you were gone by then, but you were the one that orchestrated the trade. Week 17 overtime game against the Patriots. And he needs to get over 1,800 yards to make that conditional third a first round pick. And he runs for like 180 yards in that game. Mm-hmm. And he converts the third round pick into a first, and the Saints end up getting another first round pick for it. As a GM, I'm just curious. Like, I always wondered if you were watching that from afar and just being like, what are the Dolphins doing? Why didn't they shut him down at 17.99 and say, save us the first round pick?
Yeah. Well, back in those days, they didn't have analytics, I guess, right? So they didn't have that pipeline to the sidelines with numbers attached to it. So, yeah, that ended up being a little bit of a precursor for what Ricky's career could have been. He had some really productive days and a couple productive seasons in Miami, but I always felt like this guy could have done this every year had he had his life straightened out. And that was the hard thing about it, is I liked Ricky Williams. And it's funny, before we traded him, I went to lunch with him the week before just to kind of feel him out, having known in the back of my mind that this is out there and that we may do this. And he begged me not to trade him. He didn't want to be traded. And I just felt like him in New Orleans wasn't going to work. There were just a lot of, people don't know, but there were a lot of things going on in his life that made it really hard. And that's really why we drafted Deuce to start with. So that story even gets deeper with, what they call it, the 7 degrees of separation. But we drafted Deuce with the idea of, hey, this is a guy that we can count on for the next 10 years. I just struggled with Ricky being able to count on him. And there were some events that caused that. But anyway, yeah, the 2 first-round picks, the fact that he has to produce the last game of the year to get the Saints the second-round pick, it kind of set the Saints up pretty good, that's for sure. And I felt good about that, in that this, all my guys were still at the Saints when I was gone. So I felt good that they could at least, that was a parting gift, right? That they got another first-round pick on top of it all. Would have been nice to be able to actually pick somebody, but
yeah.
I have a draft question for you, in that me and Andrew joke about when the Saints picked Ramczyk, we would do the mock drafts and the drafts, and he would and we were like, he's never going to be there at 32, but he's there every once in a while, so we're taking him. Is there a draft story where you were in the room and you're like, we don't need this player? We might not have a place to play him right now, but I don't care. He's the highest player on our board. I cannot believe this player is here for us to pick. We're picking him. I don't care. Did you have any moments like that as a GM?
Well, we just talked about it. And I am a big mock draft guy as a decision maker, but only the day or two before the draft. We would sit everybody down and go through every mock draft possible once our board was set, to kind of prepare us for what might happen. And the draft I'm talking about is the Deuce McAllister draft. We did mock drafts for 2 days prior to that draft. And one mock draft that came down leaves Deuce as the highest rated guy, and kind of just with a neon sign blinking at us, right? And I remember Jim Haslett leaning over to me and saying, now what do we do? I said, hey, we're going to pick the guy. What are you talking about? But having done the mock draft, it allowed us to communicate all of the thinking points, all of the issues that would bring on. And so that we talked about it ahead of time. Had we not mocked a draft that had him there, that allowed us to prepare all the other elements and all the other triggers that would set off if we picked him, I don't think we could have done it. So I credit the fact that the mock drafts led us to that. And we were able to get coaches in the loop. We were able to get, and nobody thought that Deuce was going to be there. But the fact that it had mocked out once where he was, it allowed us to talk it all through. And so that's, again, more information than I had. And having done these mock drafts for years, I just felt like it brings on, those mock drafts bring on conversation that you normally wouldn't have. And I want crazy scenarios. I want crazy conversation because I want to have talked about everything we can before draft day. Tom Benson used to say on draft day, he'd say, "Hey, Randy, does all this noise in the draft room bother you?" I remember looking at him one time and I don't hear any noise, Tom. I don't hear anything because we were kind of, we knew exactly what we wanted to do. They could make noise all they want, but those of us on the inside knew our plan, knew how it was going to be executed, and the noise didn't bother us. And so we had that sorted out. The art of drafting is like you said, there's a podcast there. There's probably a book there. There might even be a 30 for 30, and I'm sure it's already been done. But there's a lot of interesting stories like that behind the draft where the information gathered and what spawns off of that information sets a course for a franchise for 10 years based on a mock draft that they did the day before.
That's fascinating. Randy, I'm curious, and I ask this as a fan, not really knowing. I mean, you look at the NBA and you're at an advantage if you're a team that can pay over the luxury tax. And if you're in Major League Baseball, there is no salary cap. So certainly if you're the Yankees or the Red Sox, you're at a big advantage in terms of player acquisition. The NFL has more of a kind of an even revenue sharing system and a hard cap. And so I think as fans, we kind of tend to view it as the playing field is pretty even. But I'm curious if you feel like New Orleans being a small market, if there's still some disadvantages that we're not thinking of in terms of the rest of the league and how you compete with it.
Well, I think that is definitely, it separates some teams in this way. The cap is a hard cap, but there's no control or no regulations over cash. So cash is usually king for how aggressive a team will be in the free agent market. Hey, the day after I left the Saints, I remember the governor actually called me and he said, "What's going on? What's going on?" They had just approved $168 million in supplement in money from the state to the Saints for all kinds of things. And that was going to be a cash boom for Mr. Benson. So the cash is the small market kryptonite, right? If you don't have cash, if you don't have Fortune 500 companies, you don't have marketing money, you don't have all the outside sources that some of the big market teams have to generate cash, that can sometimes be a negative, so to speak, because what you do with cash, as you guys know, is you can spread out cap charges. You can prorate money, you can pay players their money, but spread out the proration part of that money so that the cap charges go up throughout the length of the deal. So I think cash is always something that's an issue in the NFL. Some teams struggle with it. I know the Raiders in Oakland, their last few years really struggled with cash of any kind. So they were always hard pressed to sign guys for bigger signing bonuses because they just didn't have the cash. A lot of times you spread your cash payment to players out based on your season ticket revenues and your TV revenues when they come in. So you'll see a sometimes deferral of cash based on just the amount of money and the timing of when you get that money into your bank account as well. So it's no different than you or I trying to reconcile our bank statement. The NFL just has a few more zeros on it, and you spend money when you get money, same as we do when we decide to make a purchase at the mall.
Final question from me, Randy. Thanks again for giving us so much time. I was thinking about, we see Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson either having completely broken relationships with their team in the case of Deshaun Watson, or Russell Wilson sort of, it's difficult, right? And it needs repair. As a GM, what's the main thing for you to do once your sort of dirty laundry with a star player gets out there? What's the process of how do we go about fixing this or trying to?
Well, I think communicating is the biggest thing. I think usually when this stuff happens, communication has been broken. It's really not about placing blame. It's about getting people back on the same page. I think in Houston's case with Deshaun, they're doing the right thing. Actually, they shouldn't trade him. There's no way they should trade him. That will get by. And eventually they hopefully will have a little kumbaya meeting and set it up. The same really in Seattle. Russell Wilson's not going anywhere. Let's just face it. They have their own reasons for going public with what they have done. You seldom see the team ever going public with anything. So you've got to give the players their respect. You've got to give them their platform to say what's important to them. But at the end of the day, the clubs in the NFL are different than the clubs are in the NBA. The player really can't dictate where he plays. If Deshaun Watson wants to play, he's going to have to play for the Texans. And if he wants to sit out a whole year, that's fine. He's going to have to play for him the next year. And if he does that, the guarantees in his contract, the fines, the salary de-escalators, all that's going to kick in. We don't ever hear that because the team's not going to disparage the player. But those are all mechanisms built into the CBA to keep players from controlling where they necessarily want to play. I will say this, though. I always felt like when I was the GM, I always wanted to have that relationship with the players. I want them to be able to come in at any time, any place, and I really want their opinion. I want to consider what they say, what they know, and use that as part of building consensus when we make decisions. I just don't see enough of that in the NFL anymore. I don't see that exchange of ideas, that respect card. These players know they should be. You should listen to those players. They actually know. They're out there grinding every day. They know who the good players are. They know they have information that you don't have. So I always welcome that kind of information, not necessarily from everybody, but surely from your best ones.
Last question for me. Where are you, Randy, philosophically on when these guys come loose? And I hear you that, if we're being honest with ourselves, Russell Wilson's not going anywhere. Yeah. But if those guys were available, where are you philosophically on, as a team needing a quarterback, do you give up whatever it takes to get them? I'm talking 3 first-round picks, players, whatever it takes to get a guy like Deshaun Watson or Russell Wilson in your building? Or do you feel like there's a point where, as a GM, like, no, this is too much and I'm going to rely on my ability to draft and ability to acquire players that aren't going to cost as much to stay competitive?
Yeah, I definitely fall on that side of the fence. It's a great question because it's easy for fans. It's easy for the media to say, oh, give out whatever you can to get this quarterback. Well, do your own study, but I don't believe there's been a quarterback yet that's won a Super Bowl who's taken up, is it more than 15% of the salary cap? So It is about having a quarterback, but it's also about having a team. So in most cases, a general manager is going to bet on himself. He's going to bet that he can put together a better team. I get nervous, and I think it's crazy when teams talk about giving up 3 first-round picks. What other mechanisms are you going to use to build your team if you give away all these picks all the time? I remember when we traded Rick Meyer to Chicago, you mentioned it. We traded him to Chicago for a first-round pick when I was in Seattle. Part of what Rick Meyer had to do was sign a new contract with the Chicago Bears. So he had some say in the deal. His agent came to me and said, we're not going to sign this deal unless you give the Bears a 4th-round pick with Rick so that they have another pick to build something around him. I'm almost surprised that use Deshaun Watson. I wouldn't want a team to give 3 first-round picks for me because I'm going to be there on my own and we're going to have no picks to build the team around me. So I felt like that was maybe before its time, but Marvin Demoff was the agent for Rick Meyer at the time. And so guess what? I gave a 4th-round pick to Chicago in order for him to sign the deal, even though that wasn't part of the deal. But it was Rick putting on his Chicago Bears hat to say, now what do we do to help our team? So those are the kind of things that I don't see happening. Maybe it's the communication that breaks down, but it's a tough spot to put quarterbacks in, or a tough spot to put GMs in acquiring quarterbacks, because the fans have never been stronger, the media has never been stronger and more influential. So you've got to be in your own cocoon and be solid with what you decide to do.
Randy, before we get out of here, tell the people how to find you on Twitter and your newsletter. And I want to say this, and I'm not just saying this because Randy is coming on this podcast. His website and his newsletter, guys, it is tremendous. What you wrote about Jamal Adams, I'm not going to tell the people. They have to go to your website. You can tell them how to get there. What you wrote about Jamal Adams and the Seahawks, was fascinating, and it'll be a real interest to Saints fans about free agency and giving up picks and contracts and all. So tell people how they can find your stuff, because it is fantastic.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I don't have much to offer, Ralph, but I do have 35 years in the league. So I just try to write things and point things out that, from my perspective, from the GM seat, that's all. So it's a little different angle than you would get on the street, a little different angle that you might get from some others. I just see things from that chair, and I just try to relay that stuff to the fans. I'm not a Twitter person by any means, but at Randy Mueller _ is how you can follow me on Twitter. Sometimes you might find something interesting there, but the MuellerFootball.com website is really there for the blog. And I write on the blog 2 or 3 times a week. And then we have created this newsletter, again, just based on angles from the GM's chair. In fact, I'm posting one today. You talked about the Jamal Adams one. We're going through the Russell Wilson experience right now in Seattle. And so I've kind of piece that together from 30,000 feet to give you my take on that as well. So I'll pick things around the league to kind of write on and expand on. And it's not complicated, that's for sure, because I'm a small town guy from Idaho. So I try to make it simple, and people have seemed to like it and they catch on to it. And I've had a good response. It's been fun.
Well, Randy, thanks so much for joining us. We cannot thank you enough. This has been tremendous, guys. This is why you support the show. It allows us to do great things like talk to Randy Mueller. This has been it. Andrew was better than I even dreamed it could be. Guys, thanks for joining us. Randy, thanks for joining us. And we will see you next time. Randy, I can't thank you enough, man. That was great.
Oh,
People
awesome.
are
I
gonna
enjoyed
love
it.
It was
Anytime.
awesome.
Yeah. And I could talk Buddy D stories with it. Like I feel like my graduate degree in Saints knowledge was producing him for 2.5 years. Like like it was just like a graduate studies course on the Saints, and just like all these things that you don't understand until you're like in it and like around the team. And it was just it's just great. And thanks so much. And like I said, I'm sad about the Roughnecks. It was tremendous.
Well, we'll have a cup of coffee when I come back to Houston at some point. That'd be good to reminisce about Buddy. I'd like to hear those stories, because I'm honestly say this. He was one of my favorites. I would drive to the Gulf Coast just to do his show for 10 minutes, just to spend a little time with him. He'd do his show from, what's the casino over there? One of those casinos.
He did it from the Treasure Chest, and then he did it from what's the one in I'm forgetting it now.
The one in Kenner?
But was it the Beau Rivage? He did it from the
Beau Rivage. Yeah, Beau Rivage.
Yeah.
Yep. And I drove over there a couple times just to do his show, just so I could spend a little time with him. I enjoyed him. He, as he went to the Kentucky Derby every year. So he would bring me back one of those Kentucky Derby glasses every year, because he knew I was a horse racing guy. A commemorative Kentucky Derby, 105 or 108, whatever it was. He'd always bring me back a cup, and to this day, my wife and I have those cups that he brought me back in our cupboard. So interesting guy, awesome guy. I enjoy talking Buddy D anytime.
His story. One quick story, and then we'll let you leave. When they did a preseason game in Wisconsin, I wasn't there, but I saw the picture. And I don't know if you know this, but the Camp Randall Stadium, apparently in the press box, they didn't have air conditioner. Mm-hmm. And it was like 90 degrees, and Buddy had to go there and do the post game. And this is like when he was at his largest, and it was so hot and so sweaty. He had taken off his shirt in the press box to do the post game show. And Kenny Wilkerson got a picture of it. And it is hysterical, because he's got the barks and like 4 moon pies like stacked up like this, like, because he used to eat the moon pies. He's got like 4 of them stacked up in like a Diet Coke, and it's just like his stories are it's hysterical. Gus Cattingill used to have all his outtakes from the show saved on a file. I don't know if Gus still has it, but that was tremendous as
priceless.
Well. Just
priceless.
Buddy was just, I know people don't remember him now because it's a long time ago, but it was the best.
I was better for Buddy D. I know that. That was awesome. Anytime you guys need something, reach out. I'll gladly help.
Thank you so much, Randy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Thanks for watching the Saints Happy Hour.
subscribe to our YouTube channel, then find us wherever you get your podcast, and finally go to saintshappyhour.com and become a patron of the best Saints podcast on earth.